You're in the right place. Hello, I'm Dan Harris.
Hi, and I'm Claudia Köstler.
You're over here, over there. Welcome to Over Here, Over There, a global conversation about how we see ourselves and how others see us. I'm your host, Dan Harris, and for the next 45 minutes or so, we'll be asking some stellar guests from Germany, UK, and Spain about our topic of conversation today, dual citizenship, the new got to have. This is a recorded podcast, but you can send us your feedback via our website at overhereoverthere.org or on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. There are three principal ways of getting a second citizenship: by descent, which Italy or Ireland allow if you have a parent or grandparent of said citizenships. The second is through residency, by living in a country a certain length of time, like 5 years in Ireland, after which you can apply. The third is through investment, which is known as the Golden Visa. Some nations like Cyprus, St. Lucia, Grenada, Malta, Turkey, Montenegro offer citizenship to people who buy property within their borders or invest. Of course, this isn't cheap and out of reach of most of us and stimulates ethical debate of buying access. The whole issue of dual nationality is gaining more scholarly attention and research. A whole industry and ecosystem of advisors, lawyers, and other officials will try to get you another citizenship at a cost. Ultimately, some see dual nationality as the new got to have in this very dynamic, globalized world, which is promoted or restricted depending on the political, economic, and social trends within each country and across the world. Whether it's the pandemic, Brexit, or people becoming aware of greater advantages dual citizenship would provide elsewhere, there's been a massive increase, in some cases tenfold, since 2015. It's a hot topic that's worth discussing. I'm joined by my fellow podcaster, Claudia Köstler, editor of the Süddeutsche Zeitung in Munich. Germany has taken on more immigrants over the past 5 years than any EU country and has seen a large increase in dual citizenship applications. Claudia grew up in Bavaria and has an eclectic background, having lived in California, London, and Iceland, and in fact speaks Icelandic and has traveled widely, but she remains the only single passport holder here on the panel today. Claudia, do you feel bereft
Hello.
with only one passport, or is a German passport enough?
Since you outed me here as the only one on this panel to have just one passport, I feel a bit like piggy in the middle, to be honest. But yeah, well, to be honest, as well, in my everyday life, not many people, co-workers, friends, family, do hold a second or even a third passport. So having just one is quite common in my surrounding, and I hardly notice it in my everyday life. But I notice it when I travel, and then I must say to hold a German passport is quite a door opener. According to some official websites, I can enter 128 countries without a visa or a visa on arrival. Some other consultancies say that I can even enter 189 countries as a German without a visa. The differences are because the question which territories are considered a state. But in any way, Germany is always in the top position when it comes to the question of advantages and disadvantages and which countries I can go to without any hassle. So for me, my passport is a door opener and I'm quite content with it, and I don't really feel the necessity to have another.
You sound like a satisfied customer.
In a way, maybe I haven't been burned yet.
Well, thank you. Our three guest contributors are all dual citizenships holders of sorts, each with a unique story of how they obtained an additional passport. Is it the benefit they hoped for it would be? Or is it just a status symbol? Are there any downsides to dual citizenship? We'll discuss these too with our guests. I'd like to welcome Eva Túnez Salvador, who originally is from Spain, runs her own company, Genuine Translations, as well as a new initiative, Local to Global. And we also have Lee Egan, barrister from Citadel Chambers, who has won accolades in his legal career, and Dr. Tom Lorman, who's a lecturer at University College London in European history. Each has come to their citizenship in a different way, which we'll soon explore. Welcome, and thank you for being virtually over here and over there. Lee, I'm going to turn to you first to discuss your motivation for dual citizenship. You've been a British citizen for most of your life. If you could explain to everyone else what changed as far as pursuing another citizenship.
Well, thanks, Dan and Claudia, for inviting me along to your podcast. It is my reasoning, really, come the Brexit referendum and the changes that the UK had decided to embrace, I felt quite keenly that the loss of opportunity that I'd enjoyed in a previous career. Before I became a barrister, I built mobile telecommunications networks. And I worked and lived in Katowice in Poland, in Bavaria. In fact, Claudia, I lived in Nuremberg and Munich, in the Netherlands. And I travelled and worked, extensively. I mean, I lived in these places for, I think, in Poland for about 8 months, in Germany for the best part of a year, in the Netherlands for 18 months. And I really enjoyed that period of my life and those opportunities. And I felt keenly any attack upon my ability to do that. But more importantly, perhaps, because it's unlikely I will ever work in those countries again, the UK being a common law legal system and with my change of career. But I have 3 children, the youngest of which is 19. And I was really very concerned to secure the ability for them to work and live and enjoy the opportunities and the experiences that Europe provides.
And your father was Irish.
He was. Interestingly, my father was Irish, and to the best of my knowledge, never possessed an Irish passport. Ever. An Irish passport not being necessary for travel between the UK and Ireland. And he never left the country, never left England. I think he went back to Ireland on very few occasions. Certainly, I only went with him once as a child. And then in later life, I took him back when he was in his 70s. But he came to the UK. He settled in Cheltenham ultimately, London first. The first Irish passport that I've seen in my own family was my own.
That is amazing.
So, and my motivation was really because of those, those experiences that I'd had living, working, and really enjoying my time in Europe.
And of course, your children can apply not just necessarily through you, but because their grandfather is Irish.
Yeah, they can apply through their grandfather. And I must confess that I applied. In fact, I'm looking at my passport now because I couldn't remember the date, but I received it in October 2017. And at that time, I'd had some mixed information. I didn't know if I needed to get one before them, and I was told, others told me it might assist, but I would have got one for my own benefit in any event. So they now can apply. I think they could apply anyway through the grandfather. So a real lucky turn of fate. As far as
you showed them the way, though.
Oh yeah, sure.
Eva, you're Spanish, but you went a different route to obtain citizenship, which I'm familiar with. Can you tell us about that and what dual citizenship means to you now?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Dan and Claudia, for inviting me. It's a pleasure being here. And yes, I'm a Spanish national with a Spanish passport. I moved to the UK in 2008 because I had met my husband here during my Erasmus scholarship, one of the Brexit benefits, coming here to study. And I also wanted to start my career in the UK. So in 2014, after we got married, I decided to obtain British citizenship. And why did I decide this? Well, I felt and I feel at home in the UK in general. I love this country. And I have no certainty about whether I'll move back to Spain or another country. So I decided to start the process then. Also, although my husband considers himself Nigerian, he was born in the UK, which at that time luckily gave him direct right to have a British passport. So the basis of my application was having lived in the UK for over 3 or 5 years, but also having a British husband. But after having said that, I did procrastinate quite a lot and I didn't complete my application until 4 years later in 2018, and also with the fear of Brexit, of course.
So it was 2018 you secured it.
Yeah, and to me, dual citizenship means I have 2 homes. My first home in the UK, where I spend my everyday life, and my second home is in Spain, where my family is. And obviously, I can enjoy the benefits of having both passports as opposed to just one. And now, especially with Brexit, having both a UK and a European passport makes things so much easier, doesn't it?
I say familiar territory because I too, I have three citizenships, and I gained mine through initially, well, obviously I'm American, grew up in New York, but married. And for 15 years, I didn't apply. I was just living on a permanent residency visa, probably similar to you. But then I decided after a while, if I paid taxes, I wanted to vote. Mm-hmm. And that was nothing to do with Brexit, nothing to do about working anywhere else at that time. And it was just that I was paying taxes. I thought, I want to say in this. So that was my motivation. And then after I got it, I thought I heard about all these other benefits about being able to work, all over the place. When I did work in Europe before, but the company always sponsored me wherever I went. And it was a bit of a hassle for them, but frankly, I didn't think about it too much for myself. It's just that was their problem. And so but now I wanted more control of where I worked and lived. And so it's interesting to hear you say that, as far as having two homes, going back and forth, and the freedom that gives you. Mm-hmm. Tom, yours is an interesting story. We were talking about it just a little while ago. Can you tell us how you arrived at dual citizenship?
Yeah, great to be here, Dan. My parents are Americans, and they emigrated to the United Kingdom in the late 1960s. And I was born in the United Kingdom, although my older sisters had been born in the United States. And I think initially for practical reasons, they went with dual nationality because it meant that when they went back to America, and the family used to go back to America every year, we could all go through the same immigration line if I had a US passport as well, rather than being separated from my parents. But also, my parents were very proud Americans. My father had fought in the American Army across Europe in the Second World War, and he was instilled with a very strong sense of loyalty to the United States. He was almost an involuntary migrant, and so I think he also wanted me to have a sense of an American background. But I would want to stress that curiously, I was raised in Britain. I was instilled also with a sense of Britishness. So I would describe myself as British, but of American parents, and that dual nationality is I think reflective of part of who I am and also where I come from.
Here's a question for you, and you have to give me a straight answer. England versus the United States and the World Cup. Who are you supporting?
I think it has to be England. It has to be England. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Got to be true. Got to be true.
Can I just? I mean, there's an extraordinary way in which Britain instills into you a sense of pride. I think lots of countries do that. Britain's very effective in a sort of subtle way. That I remember one of the phrases that sort of circulated was, "You'd won the lottery of life by being born in the United Kingdom." So there was that sense, but also I know that America is extraordinarily proud about the idea of being American. So I always felt a little bit conflicted about these two claims to what is the greatest country. So it's definitely a difficult question.
We all know it's Liechtenstein. Well, anyway, Claudia, I just want to bring up, Germany's taken in a lot of refugees, and the dual applications for dual citizenship has risen dramatically. What's the mood in Germany now?
That is a quite good question. There is concern about how we should deal with this topic in Germany, because, as you said before, there has been quite big changes here. Germany has not been historically or classically an immigration country, at least not before the end of World War II. But when the country blossomed economically in the 50s and 60s, quite a lot of immigrants came here because the country had the jobs and needed the so-called guest workers then, and of which many stayed on. For example, quite a lot of Turkish people came for that reason, and Italian people. And because multiple nationalities at that time, it was seen like that it can lead to legal troubles. Several states, including Germany, tried to reduce the numbers of dual citizenship by law. Adult Germans who voluntarily acquired another citizenship had to give up their former citizenship. The prohibition of multiple nationality was introduced primarily as an attempt to promote integration, but it was kind of overhauled by history in a way. And in 2001, Germany quit this treaty And it changed, and the law was relaxed about this, and there has been a considerable increase in multinationalities since then. Today, there are around 4.3, 4.5 million people in my country who have at least one other nationality than a German one in addition. But still, dual citizenship is associated with some disadvantages and is therefore not encouraged. And when we had this massive migration, which came to a peak in 2015, when more than 1.3 million refugees came to Germany, or better to say, not to Germany, to Europe. And Germany took on about 600 to 700 of them. It sparked the debate about how to handle it. A lot of them came without any passport at all. It is difficult to find out where exactly they are from. And it is also a problem because you have to find out first if they have a right to stay on, if they are eligible to stay on here, what status they have. Are they refugees? Are they going to be integrated or not? So all of a sudden, we have this debate all over in our daily basis. And of course, it's interesting times. But still, there is hesitation in giving out too many dual citizenships because there are disadvantages to it.
Tom, do you want to come in on this? Because I know, you deal with Central Europe and the policy framework there as far as dual citizenships go.
I wanted to just leap particularly onto Claudia's point about Germany. And I think one of the extraordinary stories of Germany that should be celebrated is how Germany has been so welcoming to migrants for centuries. In fact, the core of the old German success, Prussia, was partially forged through its openness to migration, particularly from French Huguenots. To give you another example, after the Second World War, over 10 million German speakers were expelled from Central and Eastern Europe and absorbed into primarily the old West Germany. And of course, Germany has been absorbing migrants for centuries, and it's part of that German story. And it's generally been a very successful story of migration. In contrast, the countries of Central and Eastern Europe have a very different story. Their story is not of accommodating and celebrating the diversity that comes with migration, but rather a struggle to, as they see it, to achieve their own particular national awakening and their own national independence and defend their own national identities. So whereas I think there is a story of accommodation and openness in Germany, in the countries further east, for a number of reasons, it's a very different narrative. And a much more exclusionary one in some sense, in that migration is regarded as really a awkward problem rather than something that in Germany's case rightfully should be celebrated.
You're listening to Over Here, Over There, and I'm your host, Dan Harris, with fellow podcaster Claudia Kussler, senior editor of the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and our guest, barrister Lee Egan from Citadel Chambers, Director of Genuine Translations, Eva Túnez Salvador, and University College London lecturer, Dr. Tom Lorman. And we're discussing dual citizenship, the new got to have. Let's talk about the process of obtaining another citizenship, which might be helpful for our listeners. As I said earlier, there are three principal ways of obtaining citizenship: through birth, descent, or purchasing property, for instance. There are exceptions, but these are the main ways of doing it. The process, cost, and commitment to obtaining another citizenship has increased significantly in some cases, but before I ask Lee about his experience, I'll briefly tell you about mine. As an American, I obtained my second citizenship, British citizenship, in 2003 through marriage. It was just after 9/11, which slowed things down somewhat. From start to finish, it took me about 9 months and cost about £140. I was sworn in and pledged allegiance to the Queen in a lawyer's office, which was all rather surreal for a Republican, with a small r, that is. But it was all rather straightforward and simple. In contrast, I got my third citizenship in 2019 by descent through my maternal Italian grandfather. I really worked hard for this after the Brexit referendum because I desperately wanted to restore my European rights. I managed the process myself, although you can hire an immigration consultant for a fee, anywhere between, say, $2,000 to about $10,000, depending on your circumstance. I also had to pay for certified copies of documents, translations into Italian, and postage costs. In total, it probably cost me about, I would say, $3,000 for my application, and another $1,000 to include my 2 daughters. I also had to secure an in-person appointment at the Italian consulate, which in itself would take another podcast to explain. But simply using the consulate's Prenota application systems, you have to compete online, in this case in the UK, where I was, with hundreds, if not thousands, of others to book one of 3 open appointments on a weekly basis, with only seconds of reaction time once they're released. In the UK, after Brexit, with demand so high, this was, and probably still is, what you have to do to get an appointment, and it's not easy. But miraculously, over the course of nearly a year, with super fast typing and my daughter Pearl's help at the keyboard, I was able to secure appointments for her sister, and me. But in the interview, I should mention, my translations were challenged right off the bat because the service I used to translate them was not on the consulate's recommended list, but was on an approved translators list approved by the tribunal in Rome. So I squeaked by there. Okay, so that was good. But then my Italian grandfather's first name had been changed from Salvatore to Samuel as he passed through Ellis Island early in the 20th century, like most immigrants as they came through. His birth certificate was therefore different from his other certificates, which he had throughout his life, which the Italian official there at the consulate didn't like at all. It didn't look like I was going to be granted citizenship then, because Italian authorities are very exacting with respect to the consistency of names across documents. Fortunately, on his death certificate, his name Samuel had been corrected by the New York State Department of Health back to his birth name, Salvatore, which saved the day. Overall, it took me about, no lie, 3 years from when I started collecting my documents and researching the process to the finish of when I got notified by the consulate that I got my citizenship. But I learned a heck of a lot regarding applying for another citizenship and now have 3. It does take perseverance, but if you qualify and really want it, just keep going. You'll get there. But Lee, let's turn to you. What was your process like?
Well, actually, that was quite an interesting process in some ways. First of all, my father had died just a year before I made the application. And I was going through a box. I was looking for his birth certificate and going through a box, and I found a certificate of christening. Now, I assumed that his certificate of christening was the equivalent of a birth certificate and made the application using that initially. And it turns out it wasn't. So ultimately, I had to apply for a copy of his birth certificate. And that took a little time. And I think because many others were going through the same process at the same time. So it wasn't a difficult process, but it was extremely time consuming. And it took, I think, from pretty much, as I say, I got the passport on the October of 2017. And I made the application or started the process pretty much immediately after the referendum vote. So it took a long time, but it was fairly straightforward. I had to apply to get a copy of his birth certificate, which came back. I was surprised that they found it and sent back a copy quite quickly. And then just a passport application form, effectively.
Yeah, can I just say there's 2 processes here. You get your citizenship, and then you have to apply for a passport, obviously. So how long did the citizenship take to get?
To be honest, I think there was no... It seemed like one process almost. It was really...
Okay.
There wasn't a substantial delay in getting the citizenship and passport. In fact, I apologise for not having the absolute detail of it, but it wasn't substantial. So the process really just took a little time and a couple of forms. Not arduous, but it took some time.
Ava, your experience as far as getting yours, you mentioned it got in 2018 through your husband. What was your process like?
Yes, so as I said, I started in 2014, but it took my time. So I first did the Life in the UK test, which I found fairly easy and actually quite interesting to learn about the British culture. Then I procrastinated, as I said, with getting all the paperwork together because it was quite a lot, and it includes letters from previous employers, one of which had even already dissolved the company. Also details of my trips to Spain and their length, bank statements, etc., etc. And then I realized that every year the fees for obtaining citizenship were increasing. And then there were extra requirements as well. So, for example, I had to do the English exam, which wasn't required before. And that was literally a 5-minute conversation with a random guy. And then, of course, obtaining residency due to Brexit. So I had to obtain the residency before the citizenship, even though I already had the right to live in the UK. That was a bit annoying because, as I said, I was already in the process of applying for citizenship, but I had that first and I spent some more money. And then finally, I completed the application and I actually received confirmation within 3 months. So I think if I hadn't taken so long preparing everything, maybe I would have taken between 6 months to a year to get everything together. And then the process, it's fairly quickly. Well, it was for me anyway. It took 3 months. And then obviously I got the citizenship ceremony, which was a bit emotional. And then last month, actually, I had to attend the Spanish consulate to confirm I wanted to keep my Spanish nationality, because otherwise you lose it if you don't confirm it within 3 years of obtaining the British citizenship. And now I'm in the process of obtaining my children's Spanish passports as well. So, yeah, it feels like it's never ending, but yeah, it'll be worth it.
Your children have a right to both.
Yes, yeah. So they were born here in the UK, in Gloucester. So they've got their British passports. Because I am Spanish, they can have the Spanish passports as well. But you have to register their birth in their consulate first, in the Spanish consulate. So I did that, and now I have to apply for the passports.
Oh, well, thank you. Tom, you haven't really had to apply as such. You were born to it.
Because I have these two passports, essentially they both open doors. I worked for 7 years in the United States without a problem. And I've been able to work in the United Kingdom. So it's definitely been effective. I would add, however, that the cost of that, of course, is one has to pay taxes in both countries as well, or at least fill out a tax form. But I just wanted to make this larger point as well about this, that the idea of dual nationality, there are two ways of thinking about it. One of them, when it terms the provision of passports, one of them is about ethnic links, sometimes quite historic ones. For example, in Hungary, anyone who has a relative who lived in the Carpathian Basin, that is in the entire territory, actually larger than today's Hungary's borders, is entitled to become a Hungarian. They also have to have a language test. It's extraordinarily welcoming, but it's welcoming on the grounds that the person is implicitly Hungarian. So I have a friend who got a Hungarian passport because they had a relative who lived there in the 1850s, but quite exclusionary towards people who are trying to come to the country who aren't Hungarians. And that's one approach. Whereas, of course, an alternative approach, which we see particularly in the United States, is of an engagement with people coming from all over the world, and I think the same in the United Kingdom. So there's quite different motives. I was just lucky that I didn't have to worry about any of this. In a sense, oddly, America gave me my American passport because of that sort of old idea of, well, if your parents are American, then you're automatically American.
Yeah, and the difference is in some countries that if you're born on their soil, like in the States, you are American. And of course, that is looked at, and that's a very controversial, very political thing going on now, especially with the Mexican border. Parents that do that will come across, and it's almost like this gift of citizenship that it's called, that even though the Mexican parents might not be dual citizenships, they will go across and have their child in Texas or Arizona or somewhere. Reflecting back on citizenship, Lee, your Irish citizenship, what about the heritage as well?
Well, that's quite interesting. Can I, before I move to that, Dan, can I just say that, in fact, I might have been a little inaccurate. When you said you have to get citizenship first and then get a passport, in my case, similar to Tom, actually, I was technically born an Irish citizen. You're automatically an Irish citizen if you're born in Ireland before 2005, or if you're born abroad to a parent who was born in Ireland before 2005. So all I had to do was prove that I was a citizen, as opposed to obtaining a second citizenship. So, but
that's similar to Italy as well.
Yeah, it's quite interesting though, because as I've said, I did it for practical reasons, really. But it probably made me examine the heritage a little more than I've ever done previously in my life. And in fact, even being invited to come onto your podcast and talk about it made me think about it a little more. And I think generally, I don't really feel particularly English or particularly Irish. I suppose my overriding, or at least I don't feel any different than I did before. But it did make me think about it a little more than I had previously. And certainly, perhaps more about as a child, I certainly felt slightly different to friends who were English. And you might be aware that in Ireland, there's a term for English-born Irish people, which is a plastic paddy. So it's a fairly derogatory term. But I suppose if I had to fit into any category, it would probably be that. With respect to heritage, I think that I'm quite pleased to be in the position that I am, not just for practical reasons. I think perhaps it gives you a little insight. Maybe it makes it a little easier to step back and look at other people's positions with a perspective different, maybe not beyond, but different to those who are thoroughbreds, if I put it in that way.
Thoroughbreds, yes. You mean single passport holders who, like Claudia, who yes,
don't
who
go that way.
Opens it. Yeah.
Yes.
Don't go down that road.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to highlight Claudia's single passport holding.
I also ask everyone here, just as you go through your lives now, to be cynical about it. Some people think, oh, it's a fashion statement. Like the title of this program, it's a gotta have. New York Times article a few months ago that said just that. Is it trite? It's a bit superficial, but I have to say myself, I have three. I have three passports, one Italian, one UK, one American. And I think what you just said there, Lee, yeah, I feel pretty good about it now. You know, I mean, when I first got my citizenship in back in 2003, the UK citizenship, the second one, you know, I was kind of soul searching because I was brought up thinking, no, you're American. That's it. You got the best. That'll be good enough for you. You know, all that. But, you know, as I mentioned, the fact that I wanted to vote because I was paying taxes. And now, after Brexit, obviously for the same reasons that Lee mentioned, I share a lot of common things with both Ava and Lee and with Tom, you know, as being born in the States. I was really, obviously, I wanted the freedom of movement, particularly. I was very concerned with the Italian citizenship. I can pass that down to my daughters, which was fantastic for them, especially one of them being at university age, which Ava was talking about the Erasmus scheme. And I don't know where that stands, to be perfectly honest, at the moment. On a heritage side, I was looking into it more, and I grew up in a town in upstate New York. I'm not going to give you my whole autobiography here. Half the town was either Irish, the other half was Italian. And I had both Irish and Italian, and just needed one of those ancestors to help me out, and an Italian grandfather who never became a American citizen, so that helped me out. But it was after the relief that I had my European citizenship rights back that as well I got prouder as far as thinking about what it meant to be Italian and the history. And I know countries have their good sides and bad sides, but the deep and rich history of Rome and of Italy, I just felt very privileged and very, very proud, actually, of that. And I will ask everyone a very searching question at the end of this. Anyway, just about a fashion statement. Do you get criticized? Is there what negativity that people might throw your way as far as having dual citizenship? Have any of you experienced it?
Well, for my part, certainly, I've got a group of friends that occasionally I go for a beer with on a Friday at the a local club, and they take every opportunity now, knowing that I've got the second passport, to make inappropriate and unpleasant, although well-intentioned, remarks mocking my Irish ancestry. So all in good sport, but it certainly arises now, and it never would have previously.
Claudia, you're obviously a single passport holder, but is that happening? Are people getting discriminated against, or is it viewed as negative in Germany?
I don't think they are at any risk of being ridiculed, or there is no criticism. But there is a bit of concern. because people might feel that you ought to be close with the country you hold a passport of. You have to vote there, you might have to pay taxes there, you might have to serve the country in a way. It's not a one-way street to have a passport, you have to give something back to that country. And in order to do so, you have to be quite involved in that country. And how can you do that if you're not living there? That is a question. But it's more about a question: can people do that? Can they serve this country as well as another? And another concern it's not a concern, but maybe I can understand that some people might be a bit jealous of people who actually have more than one passport, because it can be convenient. It can be much more easier to get access to another country. And that route is not for everyone. So there might be a tiny bit of jealousy sometimes, especially when you're at a border crossing. But otherwise than that, it's more about a concern how you actually contribute as a citizen to your country, and how you do that when you are kind of split.
You're listening to Over Here, Over There, and I'm multi-passport holder and host Dan Harris with fellow podcaster and single passport holder Claudia Kussler, senior editor of the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and our guests, dual passport holders Barrister Lee Egan from Citadel Chambers, director of Genuine Translations Eva Túnez Salvador, and University College London lecturer Dr. Tom Norman. And we're discussing dual citizenship, the new got to have. Eva, you mentioned about taking exams and with the UK, and I guess it worked both ways, but did you find that onerous, or did you find that restrictive and them trying to keep you out, or do you think it's appropriate?
I think the life in the UK test was kind of justified, and I actually enjoyed it, although I don't know if I remember everything now. But the English exam I found a bit strange, because I had obviously I'm a translator. I had my degree in translation, which included English and French, and then I also did a postgraduate course in the UK in English. So I thought that would be sufficient proof of my English, but I still had to do this 5-minute conversation. Like, I had to travel to Birmingham, do that, and then there and then they told me, yes, you've passed. Like, I don't know, it was a bit strange, that test. And yeah, so that was the only thing I was a bit put off by. But
do you think it was fair? Do you think was it a fair test and all that?
I don't know, it was fair. Yeah, I would say it was fair, but there could have been a bit more. I don't know, maybe if you hadn't had education in the UK, for example, then you should have done it. But if you had a course, I don't know, or maybe at least I could have done it online to save me the trip.
Tom, you and I are both American here, and we have to fill out U.S. taxes. That's one obligation. Is it worth keeping that up? Or like some, I have known, I think you told me earlier, that some people have renounced their citizenship because of it. The only other country that requires that is Eritrea. Every other country in the world doesn't require double taxation except for the United States and Eritrea. What's your thoughts on that?
One of my older sisters renounced her American citizenship because she was frustrated with having to pay taxes over in the United States as well. And she actually had to go up to the American embassy in London and basically do what she described as a reverse Pledge of Allegiance. I personally think belonging always has costs as well as benefits, and one has to accept some of that. And to me, my American passport is not merely about opening doors. It does, although looked at it pragmatically, it also has some costs in it, notably financially. But I think what's deeper about this is that the passport is an emotional document and not merely a pragmatic one for so many people. It's when we see, particularly in America, it's probably the best example of this, that granting of the right of residence, when people become American citizens, it's an extraordinarily emotional moment that is deeply celebrated within the United States. We've got some of it here, and I personally hope that it will get stronger. But that sense of becoming part of another country, I think, is a very moving thing. And for me, my American passport signifying that American heritage. is something that emotionally matters, and I think we underestimate repeatedly, as certainly as academics, but more broadly, we underestimate the emotive quality of national belonging. And our attachment to passports, I think, is one sign of that.
It's interesting you say that, because I was going to ask a question generally, and goes beyond just talking about passports. It's about the nation state and borders being more fluid nowadays. What's the meaning of being a citizen like that now? And people with dual citizenship or multi citizenships, doesn't that signal something? That borders don't matter anymore. The patriotism is changing. But that's anyway. That's just a comment more than a question. We're coming to the end here, but I do want to ask folks here a very telling question. If you had to choose right now, going forward, what passport would you hang on to if you only could hang on to one? Let's start with Ava. What would you do?
I think if I had to choose one, that's really hard, because if I choose my Spanish one, which will be my initial thought because it's European, that will mean, actually, no, I could stay in the UK because I've got my residency. So yeah, I'll probably use my Spanish passport and keep my residency here. Yes.
Lee, this is going to be an interesting response from you, given your discussions at the pub.
Yeah, well, I've got to say that it would feel really weird for me to do so, but I would keep my Irish passport because the practical aspects of it would be an advantage. So I would keep the Irish one, but I've got to say, instinctively, that feels slightly wrong.
Yes, it's a tough call, isn't it? But it's a good question.
Yeah,
and I'm going to credit Claudia for putting that question forward. It's
a good question.
I thought that is a tough question. But with the Irish citizenship, I just wanted to, you have a common travel area, so you can go back and forth, and it's also it allows for work as well. So
it does. It would make no effect to me. It would have no practical effect on me at all, which is interesting, because if there was an obvious practical choice, for instance, if I couldn't work in the UK without a UK passport, well, that would be a very easy decision. But in fact, there is no practical advantage to me in keeping the UK passport, which is why you may have. It's an interesting question, because you may have gathered that I've taken a very practical and sort of pragmatic approach to the whole thing. But nevertheless, I would feel very strange relinquishing my English passport, even though it gives me no practical advantage at all.
I'm going to go to Claudia first, then Tom. Claudia, obviously you've got a European citizenship through Germany. Would you swap for anything?
At the present moment, I would say no, because even if I do have my troubles with German past and my troubles with politicians sometimes, it is still the country I know most about. I breathe and think about, and I want to take most responsibility for, because I know most of the things that are going on, and I can make an informed decision about my vote, for example. I can take responsibility with a vote or with my tax money.
Tom, this is a tough call for you because of your heritage and what's happened. You're here, you're based here. What do you do?
For me, I have to say that the British passport is what matters to me. The American passport, I'm proud to have it. It can be useful. It widens my opportunities, most notably by giving me the chance to work in America. But currently, my employment and my life is in Britain. And I think emotively, the longer I've spent in this country, the more convinced I am that ultimately I'm a British person. So the passport, I think in practical and emotional terms, really matters.
Yeah, I should have known when I asked you the question, who would you support in the World Cup? That should have been the giveaway. I'll answer the question. I find that, like Lee, I try to look at this very practically, and I'm not sure if I'll go back and live in the United States in my lifetime. I'm settled here and have been here for almost 30 years. So the most practical passport, to be perfectly honest, as Eva mentioned, would be my Italian passport, because it gave me more scope, more rights, and more freedom of choice. So surprisingly, it's a tough choice. It's a real tough choice, because this country also has given me so much. So if you weigh it up on those bases. As far as emotional, it's I'm divided across all three because I love all three countries. So it's very, very difficult.
Talk about the emotive power of passports. I think one very revealing example was actually the debates around Brexit, where the idea of Britain getting back its blue passport, the old big blue passport, was really mattered. And I think that was one of the signs that debate always has an emotive quality to it, and particularly that very sense of what a passport meant as a marker of identity. That frustration among some people with the way that the European passport wasn't really the true British passport. Whereas for others, of course, it's about that European passport represented a freedom to travel all around the continent. So I think what we see is actually this is not an abstract question that you're raising here. Actually, I think it played a role. I don't think it was the decisive political factor that shaped modern British history, but it's definitely in the background.
It's patriotism and heritage rolled into one, isn't it? It was a tough question for everyone, but thanks, Claudia, for supplying that. And thanks to our panel for that stimulating discussion. Always a pleasure to work with my fellow podcast partner, Claudia Kussler, senior editor of the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and our guest, Eva Tunes Salvador, director of Genuine Translations, and good luck with her new initiative, Local to Global. Dr. Tom Lorman, lecturer at University College London, and Lee Egan, barrister at Citadel Chambers. Before we close, we'd like to remind our listeners that they can subscribe to our podcast by the button below. Over Here, Over There can be found on most major podcast platforms. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And today's podcast show notes can be found on our website, overhereoverthere.org. If you want to be a patron, we have a button for that too on our website, and we'd very much appreciate your support. Polite, insightful, humorous, and constructive comments are always welcome in any language, so please be in touch. Check out our website for our next unmissable podcasts. Until then, thank you for listening to Over Here, Over There.